Shalom. Our topic today is: do people own their own bodies? Um, and those words are to be taken literally. Uh, is there ownership over the human body? The graphic that is opening up our our slide presentation today is a very very old copy, whatever, something that I found in the public domain of the Merchant of Venice. Um, the Merchant of Venice includes the famous contract between Antonio and Shylock, um, where where a where Antonio wants to borrow money, and Shylock lends it to him, but the condition is that if he doesn't pay on time, that Shylock will exact a pound of flesh. Now, the we'll speak more about the play, but that's the context. Um, I'm building on three sources. One is a beautiful sefer by a an extremely knowledgeable and helpful author called Rabbi Keshet, who is one of the Rabbeim at Merkaz Harav. I once saw him at a wedding, and I went up to him and told him how much I appreciate his sefer. He has a large book called Kobetz Yesodot v'Chakirot, which summarizes many of the major issues that come up in the Achronim, Talmudic issues, including the issue of I drew on the selection where he has 5 points, 5 sources that are relevant to ownership over the human body. Um, I also drew on somebody who has become an extremely prolific author, Rav Tzvi Reisman from Los Angeles, um, who in addition to being one of the great Tomchei Torah, supporting, I see his name as a supporter in many Torah projects, including things like HebrewBooks.org, which is a very large, totally free website offering many scans of Sfarim that are in the public domain, or things that people put in the public domain. In addition to many Svarim I see of Reisman, but now he has been coming up with a series of Svarim called Ratz Ketzvi, and he has one on halachas relating to fertility. And in the beginning of that book, so he has a chapter about ownership of the human body, and finally, and the earliest of the three sources is an article which I think Rav Zevin, as far as I know, put this topic into the literature, though it did appear before he relates to an article that somebody wrote, but Rav Shlomo Yosef Zevin, Rav Zevin, was again also very prolific. It took me a while to appreciate who he really was, because many of his works are popular. He was a popular writer. He wrote in newspapers, and we have his 3-volume collection of Hasidic stories. It's been translated into English. Rav Zevin has Hamoadim Bahalakha, the holidays in Halacha, Laora Halakha, which is where this is taken from. Ishim Vishitot, people and their approaches, which were newspaper articles that were Torah newspaper articles that he put into a book. He was a massive Talmud Chacham. Just to get a sense of who he was, when the Rav Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson wanted to check out whether Rav Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who became eventually his future son-in-law, whether he was a Talmud Chacham, what kind of a Talmud Chacham was he? So he sent Rav Zevin to take a train ride with him and talk to him in learning, to get a sense of his halachic stature. Rav Zevin I found some articles in Torah journals by Rav Zevin, but not written in a way that they would be accessible to the public. So, meaning written in the classic halachic literature. So he had two qualities. Number one, a great Talmud Chacham. By the way, I forgot about his involvement in the Encyclopedia Talmudit. So an extremely prolific and interesting and easy to read author. He wrote an article about Mishpat Shailak Lefi Halacha, the halachic side of the Shailak trial. Now, a little bit about what the background is. Again, this is the context, not the topic. The Merchant of Venice is a play which involves a number of characters. There was somebody who was a rich friend of somebody who wanted to court a woman. The rich friend was Antonio, and he wanted to lend money to his friend, I think Bassanio, if I got it right, who was going to travel to court Portia, and Antonio didn't have the money right now, but he wanted to borrow it from Shailak. Shailak was Jewish, and Shailak had been the butt of a lot of Antonio's disgraceful, insulting, you name it. I would like a long list of adjectives and nouns for somebody relating to somebody in a very, very not nice way. So Antonia had been relating to Shailak. Now Shailak says, "I'll lend you the money without any interest, but if you don't pay on time, so you will have you will be taken a pound of flesh will be taken from you." The Antonio signs because he's sure that his ships are going to come back and he's going to have a tremendous amount of money, and so there's no real issue. On the other hand, his ships get lost at sea, and then eventually there's a trial. At the trial, so Portia and another woman come disguised as the lawyer judge, and eventually what they say is that the contract only is for a pound of flesh. Anything more than that, so terrible things will happen to you. Shailak says, "Go with me to a notary, seal me there, your single bond, and in a merry sport, if you repay me not on such a day, if you don't pay me on time, in such a place, such sums and sums as are expressed in the condition," which is 3,000 ducats, "let the forfeit be nominated for an equal pound of your fair flesh, to be cut off and taken in what part of your body pleaseth me. And Antonio, content, if faith, I'll seal to such a bond, and say there is much kindness in the Jew." Now, of course, the Shaila comes up as is in the discussion of anti-Semitism. Was Shakespeare an anti-Semite? Was he not an anti-Semite? Was this simply something that was part of what attracted people to go to plays? Was he just speaking out things that were in the society? Was Shakespeare actually, given the context, even a little bit sympathetic to Shylock? "Hath not a Jew eyes?" And there's all sorts of there's a whole piece there where he speaks about his desire for revenge, his human desire for revenge, as anybody else would have. Eventually, at the trial, so Portia was like judging the case. "The Jew shall have all justice, soft, no haste. He shall have nothing but the penalty. Therefore, prepare thee to cut off the flesh. Shed thou no blood, nor cut thou nor cut thou less nor more, but just a pound of flesh. If thou cuts more or less than just a pound, be it so much as makes it light or heavy in the substance, or the division of the 12th part of one per scruple, nay, if the scale do turn but in the estimation of a hair, thou diest, and all of thy goods are confiscated. In other words, if you don't do it exactly as so then you're going to get killed, etc. Now, Rav Zevin says there's a whole discussion. There's many discussions about Shakespeare on this. Ulam al prat echad lo amdu amavakrim kolika. There's one point that nobody dealt with. Shaila kegish et shtara chozeh shalom ifnei beit hamishpat shebevenezia. He presented his contract in front of the court in Venice. Shebeikara davar hikir b'kiyumo v'tokfo shel ashtar, and they recognized this as a viable document. But they found a way within the contract to catch Shylock that if it's not exactly so then you're going to be killed, and we're going to confiscate your property. But asks Rav Zevin, Ma haya psak hadin, a theoretical question. Ma haya psak hadin ilu haya Shylock magish et tviato al yesod oto achozeh meshuna lifnei beit din shel Yisrael. Let's say this contract had come up in front of a halachic beis din. How would they have judged this case? So that's the topic. Others, there were. He relates to an article that points out a number of things. Rav Zevin points out a number of things. But amongst them, he really gets to the end of his article where, according to him, the real issue is, does a person own his own body? And if a person does not own his own body, well, Antonio had no right to agree to a pound of flesh. Well, then, if that's the case, the entire contract, and that's what Rav Zevin said, is null and void, because Antonio had no legal right to agree to give a pound of his flesh if he defaulted on the 3,000 ducat loan. Now, this topic, does a person own his own body? This is a topic that the literature discusses, that the Talmidei Chachamim, the Achronim, discuss, and proofs are drawn from here, from there. It is a Rav Zevin wrote an article. Rav Shol Yisraeli reacted to his article. Rav Zevin answers up Rav Shol Yisraeli. There were others that got in the discussion, and Rav Keshet, we saw, listed five issues that come up. Some of them appear in Rav Zevin's article. Some of them appear in other sources. I'd like to take a certain corner of this topic. Again, obviously, the practical ramifications are beyond our scope. This comes up in the discussion, the Shilas and Chuvas discussion of selling human organs. Very likely might be a difference between Jews and Noachides, definitely. A good point that Rav Zevin was discussing, given the fact that, let's say, this was a halachic issue, would Antonio be judged as a non-Jew then? And then, let's say Antonio was judged as a non-Jew and Shylock Jew, and then what would be the case of a contract between them? I would suggest that Rav Zevin would say it wouldn't make a difference, but based on his approach. This comes up in the discussion of selling human organs, which came up and comes up, and beyond the discussion, again, there's a discussion of the moral and ethical side of it, and what it does to the system, etc., etc. But if you were to look just at the issue of is this a valid sale, and obviously don't forget about the moral and ethical issues about not donating but selling organs, or having a market of organs. If you phase that out, the moral ethical issue, and deal with that separately, is an organ, a kidney or whatnot, is that something you even theoretically could sell? It comes up in fertility issues, with a sperm bank or with ovum, and also there is an issue which I don't know how practical it is, but let's say somebody says, um, "I'm okay with you hitting me. I'm okay with you wounding me." Um, is that within uh, his jurisdiction to be able to forgive such a thing? Now, I will point out that Rav Zevin quotes, and I looked it up. He says it really directly. The Minchas Chinuch suggests that a person is able to be mochel, to forgive somebody else um, hitting them or wounding them. And the same thing for a father and a son, even though there's an isser of make avivi mo, mos you must, wounding a parent. But if the parent or the recipient of a wound is a prohibition, the same prohibition applies to both. Lo yosif lahakoto. It's prohibited to hit somebody outside of the judgment of Beis Din, giving administering lashes. So the prohibition against hitting somebody is lo yosif lakoto. You should not any more than the punishment of lashes. So let's say the recipient of the hit would forgive. He would say, "It's okay. It's fine by me." Is that a right that he has at all? And the Minchas Chinuch seems to say in Memchet, he seems to say near the beginning of the Siman, he seems to say that there would not be the avera of lo yosif lakoto if the father or the recipient of a wound would forgive. And Rav Zevin raises his eyebrows. Rav Zevin was very very opposed to that approach of the Minchas Chinuch. Now, I would first like to point out one of the critiques on Rav Zevin was that in the sources that he brought, they included both sources about ownership over the guf and ownership over the nefesh. Now, guf is a person's physical body. Nefesh is a person's life. Again, we use the word, there are different words that are used in Hebrew for soul. The English word soul is used for different Hebrew words. When the word neshama is translated into soul, that refers to the chelek elokah mimal, the divine spiritual side of our being. But nefesh is also used for soul, but that's used for our life. So like when it talks about make nefesh, that's somebody giving somebody a fatal wound where you kill somebody, or the word nefesh is used for people when it speaks about how many people there are. So the word nefesh is used for a person's being or a person's life. The Rambam says, when he discusses the prohibition against taking money when somebody murders, and taking money to be able to get him off the murder, the punishment for murder. Umuzharim beitin shelo likach kofar min harotzeach, va'afilu natan kol mamon sheba'olam. We are prohibited from taking a monetary payment from a murderer, even if he gave all the money in the world. Va'afilu ratzah goel adam lefatro, even if the avengers of the blood, the redeemers of the blood, want to let him off, they say, "Okay, I will take the money. That's fine." They cannot. She'ein nafsho shel zeh hanerag kinyan goel adam. The murder victim isn't owned by the goel adam, ela kinyan HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's owned by Hashem. Shenemar v'lo tikhu kofar l'nefesh rotzech, and that's the source of this halacha. Ve'en lecha davar sheikpid haTorah alav kishfichut damim shenemar v'lo tachnifot haaretz ki adam hu yachnifot haaretz. But the Rambam says here that the body, that the person's life is God's, is owned by God. Similarly, one of the proofs that is brought in this whole discussion is that the Rambam says that Gzeres HaKasav she'ein memisim beistim v'lo malkin es ha'adam b'hodas piv el al pi shnayim edim. There's a divine decree that you don't put somebody to death nor administer malchus, administer lashes, by a personal admission. Again, a lot of times in a court case, so if they get a non-Jewish court case, so if you can get the murderer to admit in court, so that's like points in favor of the prosecution. But in a halachic court, the death penalty and the murder conviction with the death penalty, or a conviction that would bring about malchus, only works through witnesses. And the Rambam says two things. He says, number one, because if the person admits himself, maybe a person is one of these, so to speak, deranged people who is so bitter that he just wants to figure out a way to get himself killed without actually committing suicide himself. And he's like one of these people who throws himself off the roof. And this is what he's doing in order to get himself killed. But he concludes, though, the main issue, the main principle is that this is a divine decree, that the death penalty or makos only comes about through admission. Now, what they point out here in this discussion is that a person's life is not his own to admit and give up. Whereas money, we say hodas baldin kamei, that if a person admits that he owes money, he's chayiv to pay, because his money is his own to be able to give it over. So here though, this is talking about a person's life, and makos, even though it's not talking about life, but there are sources about how makos is like a mini death penalty. And it could be that, again, it could be you have a proof from makos, but not necessarily. The Radvaz, in his commentary on that Rambam, says it explicitly, Klalo shel davar gzeros melechi, ve'eno yodim atam. This is a divine decree, we don't know the reason. Says the Radvaz, ve'efshar latet k'tzat tam lefi she'ein nafsho shel adam kinyano. A person's life is not his own. It doesn't belong to him. Rather, it's God's. Shenemar hanefashot lihena. Souls are mine. Lives are mine. His admitting about something that's not his. I can't admit that guy owes you money because it's not my money. And similarly, I can't admit that my body, that my life should be given, because it's not my life. And he adds, umalkus palgodemiso. And malkus and lashes is like a half death. Of a mamono shalo, but money is his. And therefore we say, das baldin kemea meida enim dami. And just like a person can't kill himself, so he can't admit and bring about his own death. But of course he says that it is, even though this is a rationale, but it is gzeros malchos shalolom ve'in laharher. This is divine decree. Now, the clearest source about the body, though, is the Shulchan Aruch Harav. The Shulchan Aruch Harav, the first Lubavitcher Rabbi in his first pre-Lubavitch, the first Chabad Rabbi. So he wrote his Shulchan Aruch. Part of it was lost, but the part that we have, one of the parts that we have, his part on Choshen Mishpat was a restatement of many of the halachas of Choshen Mishpat. So he has a chapter on damages, and he says the following: Asur lahakot et chavero, afilu noten lo reshut lahakoto. It's prohibited to strike somebody, even if that person gave him permission. So he explicitly argues that and there seems to be a Gemara that really supports what he's saying. But he adds a rationale. Ki ein le'adam reshut al gufo klal. A person doesn't have dominion over his body at all. Lahakoto v'lo levaisho v'lo letzaro b'shum tzar. So you're not able to allow your body to be struck, embarrassed, or pained. There's even a whole discussion of self-affliction. Is that within? Do you have the ability to afflict yourself? There's a whole discussion why, when pious fasting is permitted. But the main principle that the Shulchan Aruch Harav lays out very clearly is that a person doesn't have ownership over his body. Not only his life, but even his body. Now, the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory, so he discusses this in Likutei Sichos. I saw this quoted in Rav Tzvika Reisman's book, and I wanted to get us to the original. So he quotes that Rambam about not administering the death penalty or lashes by admission. He quotes the Radvaz, and he asks a very simple question. Why are lives in some special way God's acquisition, belonging to God? The whole world is God's. The world and all that is with it is God's. Everything is the master of the world's possession. It all belongs to him. A person's money also. Like the pasuk says, Liya kesef v'liya zav nu mashem. Money is silver is mine, gold is mine, says God. So wait a second. What is this whole discussion? Man doesn't have ownership over anything. Even though the whole world is owned by God, with regards to a man's possessions, there's a difference between a person's his life and his money. Nafsho v'chayav shel adam, a person's soul, his life, nimsaru mi'akadosh baruch hu rak betor pikadon, v'lo lebalut shelo. They're a deposit by man, but not owned by man. Meaning, with regards to our lives, we are custodians of our lives. Ubipsak Rabbeinu Azaken b'Shulchan Aruch, like the Alter Rebbe's psak in his Shulchan Aruch, Ein L'Adam Reshut Al Gufo Klal Lahakoto. Notice that, by the way, he moved from our lives to our bodies. It's not just a prohibition. There are many things. I'll explain that later on. It's not only an Indian of it's prohibited, but it's a matter of ownership. She'ein l'reshut al gufo. He doesn't have ownership over his body because it belongs to God, and it's only by man as a deposit. So when a person would harm the body, it would be like if you were watching somebody else's bicycle and you would harm his bicycle. Man's money is different. God gave over our possessions in a way where he made them ours. And that's the rest of the pasuk. Ve'aretz natan livnei adam. He gave the earth to man. And the fact that we're supposed to make sure that we don't lose our money or mess up our money or damage our money, baltashchis and stuff like that, it's not because it doesn't belong to us. It's a prohibition. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when it comes to actions, there are many actions we can't do with things that we own. For instance, let's say somebody owns some pork. Pork is not an Isser HaNo, it's an Isser Achila. It's a prohibition, there wouldn't be a prohibition to own pork, let's say. again, you don't do merchandise with non-kosher food, but let's say somebody owned the pork. So he's prohibited to eat it. Or a person owned meat and milk, and so it's prohibited for him to cook his own meat with his own milk, meaning we are restricted about what we can do with our own things. We can't, with our own pen, write on Shabbos. So there are things that are acts that are prohibited with our own possessions. But with regards to our bodies and our lives, not only is it are there prohibited acts vis-a-vis our bodies and our lives, but it doesn't even belong to us. Hashem never put it in our possessions. And when the pasuk says Liya Kesav Liya Zav Nu Hashem, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the whole world, and he directs it, and he has ownership over everything. And even after he gave it over to man, he doesn't not own it himself. Because, and sure enough, God sometimes takes a person's possessions from him. So, and then he goes on to describe why this results, why a person can admit with regards to monetary obligations as opposed to with regards to things having to do with giving up his life, etc. Anyways, I think that's a very important piece that I'm very thankful for Rav Reisman for adding that into the article because it is the obvious question that you would have. Now, what I would like to end with now is a development by Rav Zev Gustman on this particular topic. A great example of whether we have ownership over our bodies seems to be the ability of a person to sell himself as an Eved Ivri. And if you can sell yourself as an Eved Ivri, doesn't that mean that you own yourself? Because otherwise, how can you sell yourself? So Rav Gustman proves from the Rambam that that's not the case. And when the Rambam mentions an Eved Ivri, so Eved Ivri Amar B'Torah Zeh Yisraeli Shemachru Oto Beitin Al Korcho, either the court sold him, or Mocher Atzmo Lirtzono, or he sold himself willfully. Now notice I bold choice Lirtzono because that's the word that Rav Gustman builds on in his Kuntrusei Shiurim. And Rav Gustman says, Yesh l'taktek b'lashon Rambam shekatav b'mocher atzmo lirtzono. My kavanato b'teva kirtzono, lirtzono, to willfully. Pshita de boy lirtzono. Of course, it has to be willfully. Gabachol mekachol mekar. In all business, you can't. All business has to be willful. When you sell something, why should selling a slave be any different than selling land or movable property? A forced sale doesn't work. Now, so that's now again we're in the world of halacha where there is such a thing as avdus, and Eved Ivri is different than an Eved Kanani, but an Eved Ivri is still a sale, and it is still selling oneself for 6 years of work. There is a side that the owner can give the Eved Ivri a shivcha kananis, and the children belong to the Baal. So how does that work? So the Rambam says, well, it can only work willfully. Of course it can only work willfully. That's pshita, my kamashlan. What does that teach us? So says Rav Gustman, Vanira bazeh the chidush gadol mashmienu Rambam de b'mocher atzmo Eved Ivri banim retzom miyuchad. the Rambam is teaching us a great chiddush in that he says there's a need for will. Dehalacha miyuchedet din ratzon bekiddushin v'gerushin. Oh, sorry. And then he compares, there's a piece that I left out, he compares the fact that you can only do kiddushin or gerushin willfully. All business dealings also are only not against one's will. When it with regards to property acquisition, it will work. A person can acquire property even if he didn't have active will to acquire it. According to the approach that Yeush Shalom Midas is Yeush. So what does it mean? Somebody lost something. What's the classic case of Yeush Shalom Midas? Giving up hope on an object unknowingly. What does that mean? A person loses an object. He doesn't know it's lost. But it's the kind of thing, if he knew it was lost, he would give up hope on ever retaining it. So the halacha of Yeush Shalom Midas, have a Yeush, is that the finder the giving up hope of the loser who doesn't actively transfer his object, but his theoretical giving up hope is enough for the object to transfer to the finder. So that's an example where a person had an object, it transfers to another person, even though he didn't actively will that the other person should get it. It's not that he saw that he lost it and he said, "Oh, I'm never going to find it." Had he known he lost it, he would have said that, but he didn't. And similarly, Das Acheres Makne, according to Rav Anan, that if one person wants to give over an acquisition to another, it works even though the recipient didn't know at the time of the acquisition, as the Nemuchei Yosef explains. In other words, in Mekach Umemkar, when it comes to business things, there's not a need for positive ratzon. There's not a need for active will to transfer property. Sagi b'nechus de'alma. It's enough if a person has acquiescence. Masha'inkin kiddushin v'gerushin bainan ratzon b'fol. When it comes to kiddushin and gerushin, so the man and the woman must knowingly do kiddushin, and in gerushin, the man must knowingly divorce the woman. Again, after cherem d'arbain gershom, also the woman. But the gerushin al yedei Yeush Shalom Midas. Ein chalin kiddushin v'gerushin al yedei Yeush Shalom Midas. There's no such thing as doing kiddushin with a woman, and had she known I was makadosh her, she would agree. No, doesn't work. V'zeu shechidesh Rambam, the gam b'Yisrael amocher atzma le'eved halacha miyuchedes teboy ritzono v'lo sagi b'nechale. It's not enough that you acquiesce, but you have to have active will to sell yourself. But then the sale, the parsha of selling an eved ivri, says Rav Gusman about the Rambam, according to the Rambam, is not from the parsha v'chi timkaru mimkar la'amitecha, not the standard parsha of selling property. El parsha miyuchedet hi la'atzma. It's a separate world of acquisitions. K'mo shekasav Rambam anal, natna lo Torah reshut limkor et atzmo. The Torah gave him permission to sell himself. Shenemar ki amucha chicha imach v'nimkar lach. That's a chiddush that is not included in the world of the pasuk of when you sell something to your friend. And he says there are two differences between selling an eved and other sales. Number one, Shar mechira shein bahafrash be'aparsha devechitit gam konama mechira yashna mimkar leolam. The object existed, the house, the land, the movable property. It was around before the sale, and through the sale, it doesn't change, but the sale just transfers under whose ownership it was. So beforehand, the house was owned by X. Now the house is owned by Y. And that's kitim kiru mimkar lamitecha. There's a sale, there's a sold object, and it is sold, it exists, and it was sold for, it was owned by one, and now it's transferred to another. But when a person sells himself as an Eved Ivri, he's not an Eved. He becomes an Eved through the sale. So we're not taking an existing thing and transferring its ownership. He was a normal person, and then his becoming an Eved and selling himself as an Eved comes simultaneously. And it's very much like a Kiddushin, because through the Kiddushin, the woman becomes this new entity of an Eshes Ish. And that creates a new entity. It's not that she was owned and then transferred. A new entity is created of an Eshes Ish. It's not just that she was owned by her father and now owned by her husband, God forbid. So the parallel between the kinyan of Kiddushin and the kinyan of an Eved Ivri is very strong. Number two, a second reason that it's different is that in all kinyanim, the seller is a complete owner over the object, and then he sells it to the other person who now becomes the complete owner. But here he's very clear in our discussion, Masha'ein kein begufo shel adam, with the person's body, she'ein lanam balut mamonit al gufo. A person doesn't have monetary ownership over his body. Rak kefi reshut hamiyuchad shenatna lo Torah. Only when HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave some special permission to do stuff with it. Rambam, natna lo Torah reshut limkor tatzmo. The Torah gave him permission to sell himself. And the Rambam is not talking about Isser v'heter, but rather Mitorah's balos shel mamon, ownership. And the proof is that the pasuk says, "Ki avadayhem," you are my servants. Again, this is about selling oneself as an Eved Ivri is frowned upon, even for poverty. Shtari kodem, kadam aleim rishon. My star of ownership over you as my avanim preceded this star. The reason why you can't sell an Eved Ivri like a slave, you can't make an Eved Ivri subservient only as much as the original owner, which is Hashem, allows you. And it's not just because Hashem said it's prohibited, but because Shtari Kodem, my monetary ownership, says Hashem, preceded yours. A person doesn't have monetary ownership over his body. Mishum hachi sover Rambam de be'eved ivri halachim yochedes iritzono mashein came b'mekach memkar. So there's a special need for will, which doesn't exist by selling property. So that is that is a very strong position So it comes out that some of the very clear positions that a person doesn't have monetary ownership over his body. Number one is the Alter Rebbe says it straight um, with regards to hitting, and the Rav Gusman says it straight with regards to the Rambam's requirement of active will in order to sell oneself as an Eved Ivri, which seems to be the greatest example of being able to sell yourself. But you see that it's a kinyan that doesn't work through through monetary ownership over oneself then being transferred to another person. Rather, it's a whole different kind of kinyan, and then that's why he explains that why the Mishnah in Kiddushin follows up from Kiddushin with the dinim of Eved Ivri in the Mishnayos. Anyways, that's what I wanted to share from you. Just a little small portion of the large discussion about ownership of the human body. We focus only on a couple areas: the area of Eved Ivri, the area of allowing somebody to it being prohibited for you to hit somebody even if they gave you permission because they don't have the right to give permission. And of course, what sparked the discussion was the contract that appears in the Merchant of Venice about selling a pound of flesh. Says Rav Zevin, a halacha court would have thrown the case out at the outset and not found some loophole because the whole thing is null and void because the person doesn't have the ability to make such a contract. Of course, a person's life is not his own. That's why you can't take kofar for a murderer, and that's why you can't, through your own admission, get yourself the death penalty. But our discussion goes further, not only ownership over one's life, but ownership over one's body. And of course, this becomes part of a contemporary discussion about things like selling organs and ownership issues with regards to fertility, and maybe Harry Houdini kind of. I say it's okay for you to hit me, that kind of a thing. We'll end with that, and once again, it should be Le'ilui Nishmas, Ariel's stepfather. Help me out with the name again. Avigdor
Michael Ben Tuvia.
Victor Michael Ben Tuvia.
Lieutenant Colonel Vic Jacobson. Allah Shalom.
Shir Koach.